I'm going to share some old news, okay? It's not new. It came out on June the 21st, so I'm a little bit late, but I want to give my opinion. It is going to be very important. You don't want to miss this, okay? This is about HCA Healthcare, the largest hospital chain in the United States. They are accusing them, patients and their family, of pushing hospice on them. You don't want to miss it. You don't want to miss it. You don't want to miss it. Welcome back to the show. This is the Nice Veins World Podcast, the #1 personal development podcast for healthcare and wellness professionals. I am Nene Pablo, host of this podcast, registered nurse, and creator of Nice Veins, bro. I'm doing something kind of new. I want to start pulling some news and giving my opinion on it. I want to show you a video that came out from NBC News, okay? Talking about how a family member back in COVID was pressured to put their daughter in hospice. Let's watch it together and I'll kind of stop the video to give my thoughts throughout.
Marisol Perez had a virulent case of COVID and pneumonia when she arrived at this HCA hospital in 2021. She was just 42 years old.
I kept getting moved from room to room. The rooms got smaller and smaller.
First of all, people are going to ask, was she vaccinated? It doesn't matter. Has nothing to do with the story, okay? Let's keep watching.
I could feel myself dying.
Doctors put her on a ventilator and into a coma. But after kidney failure and a series of mini strokes common in COVID, about a month after her admission, staff began urging her mother, Alma Salas, to transfer her daughter to end-of-life care and let her die.
I felt like he was trying to pressure me. Hey, do you really want to live your life taking care of your daughter in a vegetative state for the next 30 years? I just looked at him and I said, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to let her go.
Another time, she says, 6 or 7 HCA staff members gathered at her daughter's bedside, urging her to end her treatment. One nurse, Salas says, was very aggressive and came in repeatedly.
She got really angry. I was like taken aback.
If a patient dies in hospice, even in...
Stupid. Absolutely stupid. You don't come in angry. Now, of course, I say this, and I want you to know that I'm one of those people who hates the news. So fully know that. I don't like listening to news because I always feel like it's people with preconceptions and or they don't have the full story or whatever, but you don't want your patients and their families to perceive you as upset, especially when talking to someone who is going through such a difficult time. That's a very sensitive thing.
The same hospital bed, their death will not be counted in the hospital's mortality statistics, a key factor used by those who rate hospital quality. And the better the rating, the better for business.
This is true. Hospitals have this metric. If the patient is not on hospice, it counts as a ding on them, which we'll learn further how this actually affects the executive's income.
I'm not afraid of speaking up in what I believe.
Dr. Ghassan Tabel practices at an HCA hospital in Southern California. He was the only physician of the 27 doctors we talked to who agreed to go on camera. Dr. Tabel says HCA is constantly pushing doctors to reduce the time they keep their patients in the hospital and threatening to punish those like him who don't conform with the loss of their hospital privileges. In fact, he sued the hospital about this issue, and the hospital settled for an undisclosed amount in 2019.
Why would the hospital care about that?
It takes courage. I'm not going to say out the gate that this guy is in the right. I don't know, but let's just realize that it takes a lot of gut to go against a big system like that. So props to that courage.
Financial reasons, length of stay is central to their business.
Length of stay is critical because when insurance runs out, hospitals have to pick up the tab. So moving patients home or to hospice opens up a paying bed faster.
I met with administrative personnel and they said, regardless of the reasons, I have to find a way to lower these numbers.
Are you saying they really didn't want to hear about exceptions?
They would superficially ask me why, but didn't seem to be interested in the real reasons.
The 26 other physicians we spoke with agree.
People can stop their care at any time, but to coerce somebody, to force somebody to do something, you're breaking many boundaries.
He is absolutely right. This is what happens when we start to get into that hospital culture from top down. They sort of say, these are the metrics that we care about. And we begin to forget what we're doing, why we're doing what we do. You know, there's a lot of people who attack the people at the top. I'm not someone who automatically attacks people just because they're at the top and they make a whole bunch of money. I don't care. If they deserve that money, absolutely. You know, go make that money. I want to make that money someday. Not a problem with making a bunch of money. The issue is when you don't understand what goes on in the trenches and you start to go on and on and on about metrics to where the people don't matter anymore. That's a problem, I think, especially if you brand yourself as a people-centered organization.
And that's what I would have strong objection to.
It is critical, he says, that families and patients understand the consequences of going into hospice.
When you deny care that is life-saving, basically you took away life.
Hospice care is appropriate in many cases and is being used more and more. But the growth rate of hospice transfers at HCA facilities is roughly double the national average.
What? Dang, the national average. HCA be putting these people on hospice. Palliative care and hospice is two different things. Hospice is a very serious thing. To put someone in hospice is to say, there is no other thing we can do. Let's allow the natural course, okay? And to get to that point, I mean, family really has to understand what we've tried, what has not worked, why it hasn't worked, what's going on. I think that we often get upset with the families who don't want to, quote unquote, let go of their family. We don't approach it the right way. We didn't learn how to communicate to families in school. This is just not taught in school. You kind of just, I don't remember a class ever taken, in nursing school that was focused on how to approach family, how to approach situations when this is what you're dealing with. Unfortunately, that's not something that we learn. That's something that we have to figure out, or we depend on our preceptors to show us how it's done. And if you get a really bad preceptor, you're marked for life. Or if you're in a situation where you're in a floor where they don't respect family and it's just a bunch of joking about, oh, this person needs to die, that kind of thing. I've heard that line before. This person needs to die. And I understand where it comes from. I'll get to that later. I understand where it comes from because hospice is not the enemy in this story. It's not hospice. It's the coercion.
Were you aware that the compensation that the head of HCA receives, Sam Hazen, is tied to keeping the death rates low at his hospitals?
Wow. No, I had no idea.
HCA is the only one of the 4 largest for-profit, publicly traded hospital chains that uses mortality rates as a factor in executive compensation. HCA's CEO made $35.3 million over 2 years, more than $300,000 of it because of lower mortality rates.
If you could talk to Sam Hazen, what would you say to him, Marisol?
I have no words. I just want to walk up to him and punch him right in his face, honestly. We're not dollar signs, we're human beings.
Sam Hazen declined our request for an interview, but in its statement, the company said, "We believe all hospital executives should have quality metrics, including mortality, as part of their incentive compensation." Furthermore, they wrote, to suggest that medical care in HCA Healthcare hospitals is based on anything other than a physician's independent medical judgment of what is in the patient's best interest is untrue and wrong.
It bothers me when spokesperson or political answers come out just to sort of make sure that the organization doesn't look bad. I don't buy it. I mean, for you as an organization to say, independent, these physicians, our patient care is 100% dependent on the individual judgment of the physician, as if the executives and the business side of the hospital has no effect on the relationship between the physician and the patient. That's not true. That's not true. That's like saying we're a nonprofit, we're here to help physicians just have a better relationship with their patients. And it's like, yes, it sounds really nice, but when it comes to reality, the physician has their hands tied behind their back. Like, talk to physicians. Talk to physicians and see how they truly feel about how the insurance companies, big pharma, hospital executives put restrictions around what they can or can't do with their patients. Talk to them. Find out. Because if you're going to come out here as the spokesperson for HCA or for this big hospital and say that there's no, doctors, we give them the freedom to do whatever, give me a break. There are incentives for these things. It sounds really nice when you say that there's a metric that we measure and we're keeping a close eye on this metric about hospital mortality because we want to make sure we reduce the hospital mortality. They're not telling you that when the patient goes into hospice, they're off the hook for that metric to affect them.
A month after Salas says doctors and nurses urged her to let her daughter die, she was discharged. For this family, a joyful ending, as the happy tears of Perez's 9-year-old daughter, Annalise, confirm. Cynthia McFadden, NBC News.
I just praise God for this person's life. Okay, I had a family member who went through this almost identical situation. Okay, it was the pandemic situation. They go in, and after a certain amount of time, they were beginning to hear from the staff and from the doctors, hey, we've tried everything we can. She keeps going back and forth, trying to wean her off the vent, doing all this stuff. And my family decided to hold on strong and to see her through. And it was and I have to be totally honest, I was feeling in my heart like, this is not good. We're extending this time and, for what? The probability of her making it on the other side is very low. And we're putting the patients under all this stress and all this treatment. Sometimes it feels like in my opinion, we're doing more harm than good, because we're just throwing a bunch of stuff at them to see what works. And we do it for a long period of time. But these success stories, people like to single them out and say, because this person, for example, here in NBC News, their story, and because, for example, the story in my family where there is a positive ending, that is not the majority of cases. That is the minority of cases, okay? So I'm not here trying to say that we ought to, never put anyone on hospice. In fact, I think that hospice is a very, very noble way to go if the situation calls for it, if the family is interested in it. I would say for myself, I don't want to be put into a situation where I'm being fed through a tube and I'm on a ventilator for a certain, a long period of time. I don't want to go through that and put my family through that. So I would probably say, hey, I do want to go I want to go hospice after this amount of day, X amount of day. The point here isn't to say whether hospice is the way to go or whether doing everything you can, no matter the age of the patient, is the better way to go. That's not the point of the conversation. The point of the conversation and this story that I get very, even emotional about is that we need to empower family to be the center of care. The whole coercing thing, and this wasn't just this one doctor who was brave enough to say this and the rest of the system, nobody else spoke up. Let's pull up the article because there's some stuff in the article I want you to see here too. But I want you to read this with me, okay? New criticisms are arising related to HCA's palliative and end-of-life care for patients, according to some physicians and nurses who have worked in its facilities. They say HCA officials press staff to persuade families of ailing patients to initiate such care, as Salas says she experienced with her daughter. Although this can harm patients by withdrawing life-saving treatments, the push can benefit HCA two ways, the doctors and nurses said, and an internal hospital document confirms. It reduces in-hospital mortality rates, for the reason we talked about, a closely watched quality measure, and can free up a hospital bed more quickly for HCA, potentially generating more insurance reimbursements from a new patient. After a patient has been in a hospital for a certain amount of time, insurance runs out and the hospital takes on that pay. So that's the reason why you see this push for people to try to get people out of the hospital. It can be looked at as a noble thing. Oh, we don't want you here. We want to get you out and good with your... But when hospitals are rushing that process, a lot of times it looks sketchy, and maybe it is sketchy. I don't know. Because it's like they're trying to get another, open bed to admit a new patient who has insurance. This article is based on interviews with 6 nurses and 27 doctors who currently practice at 16 HCA hospitals in 7 states or did so previously. It says here that all said their HCA hospitals pushed palliative and end-of-life care in pursuit of better performance metrics. Internal HCA hospital documents and texts between hospital staffers provided to NBC News support these healthcare professionals' views. I mean, if your own people are starting to say that, you're trying to get people to push hospice, that is not good. The approach should be, hey, doctor, hey, nurse, hey, people who are around this family and are caring for this patient, here are the numbers. The truth is we don't get reimbursed after a certain amount of time. I mean, if they were just honest and they said, we don't want to put pressure for you to start putting people into hospice, we want you to do what's right for the patient. Why don't they say something like that? I'll tell you why. Because you don't get money that way. It costs money to do the right thing. Do you hear me? It costs money to do the right thing. You're not going to be the best, most richest, most largest, most number 1 rated hospital ever. Okay, but this is what happens when you get people who are business only mindset running a show that is supposed to be humanitarian. Okay, it says here, this is where there's a difference between palliative care and hospice. Offering palliative care to seriously ill patients has gained traction industry-wide in recent years as a treatment for symptoms, as well as providing comfort and pain management and support for their families. Again, there's no problem with palliative or hospice care. This is just defining what they mean. Palliative care is when the focus of the treatment is trying to balance, okay, both. It's kind of a gray area, to be honest. But I would say that it is trying to balance comfort of care or quality of life with trying to solve the problem. It's typically the direction you would give patients who have a terminal illness, okay, like cancer or Parkinson's or something like that. Really bad. I mean, it's trying to balance the two. You don't stop treatment, but you do put a higher priority on quality of care versus just doing the most aggressive thing out there to try to save the patient's life, etc., or try to eliminate the disease. Okay, that's kind of a balance beam, but it is a gateway to hospice, which is sort of the next level. Hospice is when you absolutely stop any effort any effort, okay, and you focus exclusively on comfort care, meaning you try to give them the best possible space to pass naturally and to do it comfortably with the rest of the family around them. That is hospice care, and it's a very noble thing to do if that's what you do with your family. But again, it has to be a decision that the family makes. This is the crazy thing. Some $305,400 of that was incentive pay generated by specifically the mortality rate calculation. You know, if I got a $305,400 salary, that would be amazing. And this was just an incentive. Okay, so you now begin to see why there is, I mean, if that's the incentive to crack down on these mortality rates, it feels, I don't know, it feels like anyone would do anything to try to get that money. Well, if your moral code is skewed. But there you can see the incentive, the reason why it's such a big deal. That is generated from just the mortality rate calculation. Even crazier, one doctor recalled attending meetings at which hospital administrators discussed the importance of transfers to hospice care before a patient dies. The primary area of discussion was, why didn't this patient get moved to hospice 12 hours before, the doctor recalled? What was the delay in getting them into hospice? Again, this is not trying to accuse people if we don't have the full story, but it seems pretty sketchy when there's that big of an incentive. The first thing, key takeaway that I react to this whole thing is that people need to understand what palliative and hospice care really is. Families, I mean, the general public needs to understand what it entails, what they mean, because education is key when they're in the hospital and they have a loved one. And these words start to, because a lot of times we talk to families that are in the rooms, they don't understand some of these big words, some of these things, and anything that the doctor says, Lord have mercy, anything that the doctor says when he comes in is often, especially some of the families who English is not their first language, anything that the doctor says is like absolute truth, and I must follow everything he says. And, you know, they don't understand the situation. They get confused. It's not explained well. We get impatient with them. And these situations is something that I came across again and again and again. But we have to be patient with our families in the hospital, with our patients, to explain what palliative is, what is hospice, and what are the things that we've tried, and why we are thinking the way that we think. Because the thing that I don't want to get to, and this is something that I really, really want to stress. I am not saying for a second that doctors do not have the right to explain the gravity of the situation and appropriately discuss options of care. I think that the problem I have is the coercion. If a hospital is trying to tell physicians and nurses that they need to push or they need to urge families to make a decision, that is not our role. Our job is not to coerce patients and families into what benefits the hospital, okay? It's to empower families to be the navigators of their care and to be advocates for what they want to do. And too often we feel like this is not what I would do. And so we try to project what we feel should be done in this situation. Okay? And so long as there is no abuse, so long as there is no really bad ethics situation going on, or a very inappropriate, so long as there isn't that category of stuff, the clinician needs to step out of that role of pushing and be a support in educating, informing, and allowing them to be the directors of their life. I say this, and at the same time, I think to myself, on the flip side, if a patient says, who are you to decide and play God on how many months you think my family has in bed? Who are you to say these things and to play God? Because I've heard this too. I mean, we have to realize that it's not necessarily that doctors are just playing God or nurses are just playing God when they bring up the topic of hospice or palliative care, which brings me to the other point that we need to know what we want when we're in these situations and write a will and write who can decide and what we want to happen when these situations are at play, because it makes it incredibly difficult for families to have to make those decisions for us. That's another thing that we have to empower people to do. If this story frustrates you and makes you upset, I just have one thing to say. Get out of these hospitals. Get out of the hospitals that you see this kind of stuff go on at the top. It's not worth it. It's not worth how much money they pay you. It's not worth it to go through the stress of feeling like your core values are being, pressed upon because you feel like something is not right, but you are doing it because they're giving you a paycheck, because you have the clout of saying, oh, I'm working at this massive facility, level 1 trauma center downtown, blah, blah, blah. It's not worth it. If your core values are being compromised because of management in your place, you must go. And as far as I'm concerned, a lot of these hospitals, if not all of these hospitals, have some sketchy play at the top. It's very few and far between where hospitals have a great business model. And you need a business model to keep hospitals open. You do. But there is such a thing as good business and bad business. Good business means you're making money and you got a win-win situation with the client. Okay? Bad business is where you step on everybody else just because you want to get the top dollar. No. What are your thoughts on this story? Give me some feedback. Make sure and like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. And if you're listening on a podcast platform, give me a 5-star review. I really appreciate it. Follow me on all social media. Remember to be a positive force and influence within healthcare and society. Que Dios me los bendiga. When I would listen to podcasts before I became a podcaster myself, I didn't realize how much leaving a 5-star review helped. And so now on this side, I just want you to know that it really does mean a whole lot when people review and share the content. So if you enjoyed it, please share it with somebody and leave a 5-star review on whichever platform you use, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc. And if you're interested, you can also find us on social media at Nice Veins Bro, or shop online at niceveinsbro.com. My personal stuff you can find under Nene Pablo, which is spelled NENEPABLO. I spend most of my time on YouTube making vlogs and videos and on Instagram. So I would love to connect with you. And remember, be a positive force and influence within healthcare and society. It's all about God, wellness, and purpose here. Thank you for listening.